wife this way, so you never know what's going to happen. So if we can take your seats, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the moderator for the next keynote. When I started talking with Jonathan about doing this keynote, we've had a bit of a global sort of theme, as you can tell here, with Sir Martin Sorrell and Jonathan Miller. At the time, Jonathan was president of International of Nielsen Online, and he has an exciting new global role as CEO of Nielsen Telecom. And obviously, when we look at what's happening in the mobile space, what a fascinating job that is and is going to be for him. I'm going to have him introduce the panelists, and we're going to get right into it. So with no further ado, please welcome Jonathan Carson, the CEO of Nielsen Telecom.
Great, thanks, Drew. So we've got a really fantastic group of executives here up on stage, so we're going to move pretty quickly into a roundtable discussion. But before we do introductions and kick things off, we wanted to start with just a couple of data points which really highlight the importance of international in the digital landscape. And I've been working in an international role for Nielsen for the past several years, and have gotten a really personal appreciation for this. And the biggest impression I think that's been made on me is all of the change, all of the impact that digital has brought to the U.S. market. When you look at international markets, it's dramatically more profound. The level of change from a cultural aspect, from a social aspect, and from a business aspect is really, really, truly profound in a lot of these international markets. And that's, I think, the reason that this is a big highlight for AdTech and the reason for this panel. So let's dive right into a couple of statistics that demonstrate that. First of all, this is online population by region in 2000 compared to 2008. And I think there's two stories that really jump out here. Number one, back in 2000, the total population was about 360 million globally online. And we've had almost a fourfold increase in just 8 years. And even if 2000 seems like a long time ago, 8 years is a pretty short period of time. But the real story here is the driver of that. The driver of this growth is really developing markets. And so you see Asia-Pac we go from a situation where Asia-Pacific, North America, Europe were kind of we're most of the share, and we're pretty evenly split, to Asia-Pac taking a really dominant share, and a very large growth in the population share for Middle East, Africa, and Latin America. And the online ad spend has not yet followed. So this is the share that online has of total advertising across a number of markets. And you see in Western Europe, in the U.S., in developed markets in Asia, in Asia Pacific, the online makes up, roughly 10 to almost 25% of total ad spend. And then when you go down to developing markets, that number is dramatically lower. It's a couple percent, or even, not even on the charts yet. And when you think about what's going to happen to this, those developing markets are, number one, they're already fast-growing advertising markets, and number two, the online share is going to increase. So a lot of the growth in online advertising globally is going to come from these developing markets in the coming years. You don't talk too long about international digital landscape without bringing up mobile, and there's a very good reason for that. This is a number of people who are online in a market compared to number of people who are mobile subscribers. And you can see the dynamic here in North America. Almost the whole population has PC internet access, so it's about the same as the number of people with mobile subscription. And that's highly unique in North America. The imperative to use the mobile as an access device for internet, because of that dynamic, is not nearly as high as these other markets where the mobile subscribers dwarf the online population. So that's kind of why mobile is so important, and I think that'll be a theme in the discussion today. And the last point is a softer one, but real important. International markets a lot of times play by different rules in several different ways. And this is a dynamic which I think opens a lot of challenges to global companies, but also can be the key to opportunities. And just a couple data points which show this. This is the top portals within China. In the upper left corner, you can see it's really pretty dominated by local players. There's an interesting dynamic in social networking where you've got a market like Brazil. It's Google's Orkut. That's the single. They're the dominant player in that market, and it's the only market that they are the leader. So that's kind of an odd dynamic. Markets like China, Germany, and Japan, mostly local players. Whereas a market like France, which tends to like its local stars, Facebook and MySpace actually have a great presence. And then there's all sorts of business model differences market by market. So in India, almost the entire display advertising business is CPA, and they have all sorts of kind of clever CPA approaches in that market. In China, the film companies have started releasing theatrical films in conjunction with the theatrical release to combat piracy, and that's an ad-supported model. And then in markets like Korea and China, display advertising is actually sold on time slots instead of impressions. So kind of all these different business model things happening that open up both challenge and opportunities. So these are the types of things we're going to discuss with this great group of panelists. And with that, we will dive right into it. We're going to start with introductions, and each of our panelists will tell us a little bit about their role and one interesting international project that they have going on within their business. So to start off with, we've got Imran Khan from JP Morgan Chase.
So my name is Imran Khan, and I manage the global internet research at JP Morgan, as well as U.S. entertainment companies. So my team covers from Google, Yahoo, to Baidu, Tencent, those names, Mercado Libre in Brazil. And in terms of, I'm coming from more of an academic perspective, more of a Wall Street analyst. In terms of what we did, I think based on the trend that we're seeing, internet companies are more global, and we integrated our team very early on, and I was in charge of managing the global internet research. So we have analysts in China, in Brazil, in India, everywhere, and constantly looking at the different data and the growth, and what we're seeing that our advertisers and the companies that we cover are generating more and more revenues from those countries.
I'm Vivek Shah. I am the Group President of Digital for Timex News, Business and Sports Properties. In the news category, we have Time.com and Life.com. About 25% of those businesses from a traffic and revenue point of view are outside of the United States. In the business category, we have CNNMoney.com and Fortune.com, and that's about 15% of the businesses outside of the U.S. And then in sports, we have SI.com and Golf.com. It's a smaller number, it's 10%. Sports tends to be far more local and very different sports in different territories. Most of our products, though not all, are English language, so we tend to dominate or succeed in the UK, Canada, Australia, and India for the obvious reasons. The area that interests me most right now is China. I mean, you've got 338 million internet users in China. It is the largest internet market in terms of total usage, and that's only 25% of the population, so that can only grow, right? So the growth rates associated with that market is pretty impressive. I think the key thing in China, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later as we talk about markets, is partnership. And so we are working closely for distribution reasons, for regulatory reasons, for relevance reasons. Partnership often makes sense in markets like China. We have FortuneChina.com, which is local language, and SIChina.com. They're nascent. They're early days, but we're optimistic about what they can do. China's display advertising market through September is up 40%, and in the United States, depending on which statistics you rely on, down 5%. So some different growth characteristics in that market.
Hi, I'm Chris Ahearn. I run media for Thomson Reuters. That was our, pardon me, Yankee game last night, so I apologize about my voice. I don't. I'm glad we won. It covers the Reuters News Agency, which is a B2B provider of content and services to many people sitting out here and some of my fellow panelists sitting up here with me. The Reuters.com network, which we publish in a variety of different languages in the US, the UK, Japan, China, India, and then on a lesser scale in Brazil, Italy, France, Spain, etc., Arabic languages. So as opposed to what Vivek was saying about English language, we're pretty conversant about 13 to 14 different local languages that we publish in, and a series of financial publications as well that are very targeted at financial professionals, particularly in the capital markets and the deal space. One interesting thing, I guess I'm going to play off of China for a second, although we shouldn't make this a China-dominated discussion. When I look at our Reuters.com network, that's an audience around the world of, call it 30 to 35 million on a unique basis every month. Through a partnership and an investment we have in a company called China Web that does business in China under the brand name Heshun. The size of that audience alone is 30 million, and is doing impressions and page views that is just literally off the charts. They focus on providing financial information to individual investors with both an advertising and a subscription-based set of product models. So one thing I'm sure we'll get into later about different models is we like that balanced approach. We like to find partners that bring us into markets with multiple ways to make money and not just be dependent upon advertising.
Okay, my name is Tero Ojanpera. Don't try the last name. My kids cannot pronounce it anymore since I've been living a couple of years in the US now. So I'm with Nokia and in the executive board in charge of our new growth initiatives when it comes to the services. Services meaning here content, whether it is maps, apps, music, media, etc. And the project that we are now really focusing is what we call under brand Ovi by Nokia. It's an interactive distribution network, a global one. Given that Nokia is a global company, currently we have 38% of the global mobile phones market. And talking about international, I think as an example, Middle East and Africa, our market share is 55, Southeast Asia Pacific 48, telling that those market has been really good for us. And China and India, interestingly, China was something where we started already, I think something like 20 years ago. It has served us well, and one of the sort of the things that we did early on, and we'll come probably back to this one, was really focusing on the distribution and building our position there, and same happened to Africa. In some ways it's interesting to me that the China discussion feels like almost yesterday's discussion, because I think now the real growth is coming for us now, or fastest growth is coming from Middle East and Africa. But at the same token, this new sort of the interactive media or digital content distribution channel that we are building is really relevant for international market, given that, for example, in India, the PC versus the mobile, I think the most of the people actually have mobile, and it's not really a smartphone market, but it's really low-end mobiles, but still you can distribute content. And we have been focusing on that how can a $30 phone guy that is buying a really cheap phone, unsubsidized price, given that we're in the US, where in here you would get it free, or you would actually get paid for to get that phone. So in that sense that you can actually really push content, and that's the agenda for us, that how can we put content in the hands of the people with great marketing, interactivity, taking advantage of the mobile, and really drive the good things for the consumers.
Okay, great. So we talked about some examples from your own efforts internationally, but from both a consumer behavior perspective and a kind of business model perspective, things can work very differently in international markets than the U.S. Can we talk about some examples of other businesses or other consumer applications that you guys see in international markets that you think are particularly interesting, particularly unique, and could potentially come into the U.S. in the future?
Yeah, I mean, you referenced, Jonathan, one of them with respect to how display advertising works in markets like China and Korea versus the way it works in the United States. As many of you know, display advertising is based on ad impressions are based on page views. And so anytime someone loads a page, the ads change. And I think the flaw in that model is that you have on one end publishers and providers of ad inventory and display advertising who are doing all sorts of things to manipulate page views, to drive page views, to drive ad impressions. And on the other hand, you have people who may not do anything, but there's no distinction or differentiation between a page view and therefore an ad impression that lasts 2 seconds and a page view or an ad impression that lasts 30 seconds. They're literally both on a spot on a CPM basis, and the CPMs don't change based on the exposure time that you get. And so I think the model that seems to have emerged in Asia around using time versus page views as a way to drive impressions is an interesting one. And now you can do it one of two ways. You could continue to buy and sell ad impressions like we do in the United States, but layer in a time factor. Let's measure it. Let's understand what kind of time spent this advertising is actually getting. And the other thing is you could sell allotments of time, which I think is sort of the approach that you see in Asia, where you're selling 15 seconds or 30 seconds of exposure. Lots of things to solve in that, right? What is exposure, what's in screen, and versus what's idle, and whether someone's actually in front of their computer. Those things need to be solved. But I think it also helps fill this void that those of us who are in the display advertising business feel between CPMs and click-through rates. I mean, there really is no other metric that we can report on a real-time basis around which marketers can optimize campaigns. And that's what they want. Post-campaign analysis is a little harder, right? Because you really can't affect anything after the fact. But if within a campaign you can start to do things and say optimize based on exposure time versus click-through, that could be an interesting model, particularly in the brand side of display versus the direct response side of display. So I think that's interesting and something for all of us to study.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, taking maybe in a different direction. As Tero was saying, what we're seeing with mobile adoption and, if you will, the PC bypass aspect of that, which, Jonathan, I think you were right in terms of pointing out that part of it's a cost of access, but then part of it is what you're conditioned towards. And what we see in Asia is a whole raft of services that traditionally would be provided, or we would think about in the United States as that's got to be PC based. People quickly strip it down to, so what does it really mean for mobile banking in Japan so that it's running on Docomo when you're on the subway? If anyone's ever spent time on the Tokyo subway, you see everybody on their phones all the time. Or people in transit in China, the snackability aspect of all different bits of content drives it right through the roof. And as a result, since people are not conditioned to everything must be free, you also see the emergence, I think, like everyone was saying, of Tencent and others, or maybe we're talking about that backstage, of much heavier aspects of paid and advertising basis. And the publishers I interact with, in China, I think less so in India right now, because it's just at a different stage of its development, really are focused on, I've learned the lesson of Western Europe and the U.S., let's multiplicity of models. And there's much we can learn about that in terms of really specific niche-oriented offerings.
Right. I think one element that we are seeing is very interesting is the kind of I call it the context-based services or advertising. And see, given that the mobile is especially in Asia, it's in a much more prominent role in delivering content. And basically the mobile knows your context, where you are going, who have you actually interacted lately, etc. So when you pull all of that together, you have a much better understanding what's relevant for the consumer at this point of time. And this is something we have been working, but we are also seeing that some of the markets in Asia are ahead of the US in that area. The other one is that, just more from the business model perspective, actually something we started together with Reuters some years ago in Indian market was that hey, actually, if you take the mobiles and the consumers who basically, if you ask them to pay monthly or even a very small fee, let's say $5, they say that I can't. And because actually the reason is that they don't have that much money in their bank account, or if they don't actually have bank account, but they don't have disposable money that much at one given point of time. But if you say that pay me every week or every day, actually something, they will do it. And what we did was that started with actually farmers with the crop prices, but it has expanded now to the education and other content that we set up a service that runs on a very low-end phones over the short message service channel, so you don't need actually a fancy 3G network, and it has worked really well in India, and now we are expanding it into other markets in Asia. So just reflecting that in the US context, so here the media revolution started for the phones from the high end. In Asia, it's in some sense also starting from the low end of the phone market.
I think one area I see that there are a lot of potential. It's a little beyond advertising, but more of a transaction-driven business. I think if you look at in Asian market, companies like Tencent that we're talking in the backstage, it's the third largest market cap publicly traded company after Google and Amazon in the world. If you look at, and vast majority of their revenue comes from small transaction, people buying product. I think there's a lot of opportunities in the virtual currency. We're seeing pretty strong growth in the casual game in the US through the social networking platform. And also I think one big area, I think we haven't seen much innovation, and I expect to see a lot of innovation over the next few years, is the mobile payment. I think eBay just opened up their PayPal for the developers, and I think you will see pretty significant growth in the payment system, because we still have very Visa, MasterCard driven business model, and I think there's a lot of room for innovation in that area.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point, actually. The payment, and there we are really seeing that in the countries where the payment system is not as established as here, we see a great demand for that one, and we just launched an initiative called Nokia Money, that is basically enabling financial transactions with your phone, transferring money, paying bills, etc. in a markets where you don't have a very established banking system or payment mechanism. I think also coming back to what could it mean even here is that if you think about US, I think there's an underserved market that also in here that is not addressed by the current the financial system and the low income segments.
I think it goes back to, you asked a question earlier about some of it does condone the culture and cultural norms and how people are brought up. So, it might happen in the U.S. and there could be kind of at the bottom of the pyramid opportunities, but I think it'll evolve and it'll take time. And just look how long it took for people to really adopt debit cards that they're walking around with, or Visa Cash or whatnot. This is not an overnight thing, whereas, in the rapidly developing economies, we can experiment a hell of a lot more. And say, okay, there is this clear market hole. How to use digital cash, how to use mobile, etc.
Yeah, there was talking about the consumer reaction. I was having a really fun experience. We did an experiment actually in New York with MasterCard, Visa, and AT&T. MasterCard, AT&T, and a couple of other companies around the mobile payment, and I was testing out with your phone. It's like a contactless credit card, and you can pay with the PayPass machine. And I went to the McDonald's and tested it out, and I said I ordered a cup of coffee. It was a company phone, so then I said that I got my coffee, and I said, and I'm going to pay with my phone. And the lady is staring there that we don't accept phones as a payment. And
it's good that you didn't ask her what's in the fillet of fish.
And then I swipe it next to the machine, and it says authorized and approved, and here we go. Of course, she would have been better off taking my phone.
Okay, great. So if we look at the recent history of the big global digital players rolling out to new markets, there are certainly some big success stories, but also some pretty prominent non-successes. Can we talk a little bit about that dynamic and what makes for a successful international expansion strategy?
So, from my perspective, from analyst perspective, I think if you look at the companies I cover, they did, I would say, a pretty good job in the European market. But if you look at their performance in the Asian market or Latin American market, it's not so good. Primarily in the Asian market, if you look at the number one search engine in China is Baidu. Number one search engine in Korea is NHN. So if you look at in the Latin American market, in the Brazil, number one e-commerce site, a site called Mercado Libre, who actually grew their business 52% on a local currency last night. If you look at their growth number, they've just reported numbers. And I think what I found is the biggest challenge that a lot of these US companies face is the culture and understanding about how the local business works. And I think, we can go at detail about that, but I think understanding the Chinese market is very different than the Western European market. How do you do business? How do you do partnership? How do you build the relationships? And I heard many funny stories about many different companies where things went wrong when I talked to the companies that we cover the Chinese market. But I think basically the biggest issue is understanding the local culture and understanding how the local language and how the local business works.
I mean, clearly language matters. You can't get around that. But from the culture perspective, I think it's a little deeper than that, which is global company. I'll speak as a global company for a second. I think global companies tend to have almost a colonial aspect to how we will expand. This is how we do this. And that's fine as long as you're looking at just creaming off sort of an international market. And there are always international levels in the various countries. But if you want to be a real media player, you want to be a real information player, you got to get down deep and you got to be domestic. And to be domestic doesn't mean you ship in your product ideas from New York or London or Boston or wherever. It means hiring locally, understanding locally, actually turning the brand and the product offering a little bit loose locally and saying, look, it's going to be different here. And actually leveraging the innovation. And there was when I think it was Jeff Elmo, when he was in India recently, was really pointed in saying, look, we're looking at India as a hub of innovation, not just for India now, but for the rest of the world, and figuring out a little bit, Tero, like you were saying, how do you take lower cost or more rapidly developing thoughts and export them back in? And I think that until global companies really get that balance right of, what's international, what's domestic, how am I pulling back out of Bangalore as much as I'm pushing back in, it isn't going to really work for them.
I think that's a very, very good point, and we have kind of observed, if you look at the trend, what's happening is that we have used the term that innovation goes east, and it's very visible now that if you look at what's happening in India and China, it started from the heavy outsourced, sort of the cheap labor, but I think if you look what's happening there, those local companies are catching up very fast, the quality is getting there, and they are starting to actually look at how do we expand to the Western market. So what we did early on was really, I think it's very much aligned with what Chris said, was that, okay, you need to localize, you need to hire local staff, and it's a kind of, if you're a global company, it's a balance between that, how do you kind of still actually maintain the good parts of the global culture and the scale that you have while actually localizing, and it's kind of what we have done is to building a platform that is on the other hand globally scalable, but on the other hand you can localize. And India and China are one of the best markets that we have, and India especially is like mobile in India is Nokia, and that was very much a conscious decision to localize. We have an Indian person running from the beginning. It's about hiring right talent, but also then focusing what are the characteristics of the market, what do you need to do, and Indian case was, for us, it was the realizing that, hey, for the phone market was that distribution is going to be a critical. The same with the China, and then we expanded to Middle East and Africa. If you don't have your control of your own distribution, you are not going to make it those market, and that's how we actually, in addition to having a good product, having marketing, etc., it was about, hey, let's expand the distribution network and that helped us to actually conquer those markets. Now moving on to the digital world, I think it's again the same lessons apply. It's about you got to have the best local content that is locally relevant, and I think you can only achieve that by really understanding what's going on in the marketplace. You cannot do it from here.
Yeah, and I think if you're a smaller company, I mean, it's obviously very different. It's have one thing that you uniquely do really, really well that you can enter that company and people can look to as a proof point and then pivot around that. I think people do make the mistake of assuming, like the big companies, because I can do a bunch of different things, I should try to do a bunch of different things as I'm looking to expand globally. Do one thing, do it well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And if you are a small company, are you able to ride on the back of the big companies? Because I think in some ways, if I look, for example, our strategy is really about with building a digital distribution network. It's also enabling small partners to actually get their things onto the marketplace and test it out with the consumer, which was earlier more difficult when we had you need to tailor it for this carrier, this is on the market. There has been missing a layer in the phone world that you can actually put out the content and it really goes straight to the consumer, but that's now happening. So it's a great opportunity for small companies to focus on a niche that can become a big thing, but do that niche well.
Yeah, I think that innovation point is a really interesting one. When I took my international job a couple of years ago, the best piece of advice I got was to remember that the U.S. is the exception case market. And I think oftentimes when we sit in U.S. companies, we think, okay, we're going to build it, get it right in the U.S. and then syndicate out to the world. And actually that's probably totally the exactly wrong concept. The U.S. is the one market which is probably more different from the rest of the world than any others. Another big point that you guys brought up was the issue of localizing for content. And Vivek, you're sitting in a situation where you are making portfolio decisions around the degree to which you should localize. Can you talk about what that process looks like?
Yeah, so from a content business point of view, and I think you start with attempting to have a global product that has global appeal. And in many instances, by the way, it's not as big a leap as that may sound. I'm surprised sometimes to understand how many people outside of the United States are interested in the U.S. perspective on things. So, just making sure you understand what that potential is, and then what's the next layer of opportunity by truly going out, becoming global. Then there are issues around versioning. I frankly think, and this is not just a comment around geography, I think this is a comment around all user groups. I'm surprised at how many websites it's the same homepage for every user. The homepage doesn't learn what the user is interested in doing. Some do, most don't. And so there's a lot of technique around understanding, well, if they're coming from here and they've been consuming this, can't we tailor the experience without them actively doing anything? Certainly active personalization is great, but the take rates there can be sometimes disappointing. But passively doing that and creating something that appears relevant without actually understanding how that happened and it's there. And then I think certainly going local, and I think to Chris's point, it is often a language issue and being able to deliver in that way. But look, we've built, significant percentages of our business I think doing some of the blocking and tackling, and I would just encourage others to understand that that's there. Distribution partnerships, discovery. The way content gets discovered is generally consistent around the world. It's just different search engines. It's just different social networks. It's different portals. You need to have those relationships. Just think about the time we spend doing that within the United States, and if you apply even a fraction of that outside the United States, with the same product, you will find yourself opening up audiences.
Yeah, I think you use the word portfolio, and I'd be curious to the other panelists, but I know the way we think about it is, look, there are a bunch of different bets you have out there at any given time. And everybody loves to talk about China, India, Brazil, Russia, a little less so right now, but the BRICS and the BRICS plus 8, etc. These are all also long-term bets for people. And you had it up in the slide earlier. Yes, there are tons of people who are living there, but advertising spend as a percentage of GDP usually is lower than it is in the developed economies. Yes, there will be hyper growth as a result if you fundamentally believe that advertising and GDP has a leverage relationship, and historically I think we've seen that. But today in digital, there's not a lot of money being made in India. There's not a ton of money being made in China. So thinking about it as a portfolio bet of I want to be there when it really breaks and really hits. I want to have relationships in traditional media as well to extend my brand and my reach. And you wouldn't just think about the digital aspect of a time. You think about the print edition as well and have these multi-touch points. that's how we think about it. It's you got to focus in 3 different horizons, and any global company worth their salt that is not making those investments through the tough times, has already opted between survivability and thrivability. What they care about is survivability.
I think in China, I think you brought up some interesting point. So first of all, if you look at it in the U.S., advertisers are spending roughly $1,000 per person per year. And if you look at the globally, that number is significantly low. But I think a couple of things to keep in mind. The amount of middle class growth in China that happened in Europe, it took 300 years. In 30 years, they actually had higher number of middle class than Europe had in 300 years after the Industrial Revolution. So I think it's growing really fast. But what I found, looking at the companies and the CEOs that I talked to, that it seems like none of the U.S. companies really figured out how to win the Chinese market. And and I think it's very very important for the entrepreneurs or the CEOs spend a lot of time in China. And with time difference and how long it takes you to go there, I think very few companies really invested that amount of time. Some of the U.S. entrepreneurs that I know actually moved there in China and actually building up a business, actually doing relatively okay. I was at the Stream conference with Vivek, the WPP host, and was talking to this entrepreneur in the online travel space. And he basically moved there and started this company, comparison travel shop business. And it's doing relatively well. So I think the big problem for the big companies, you still have a big market in the U.S. and the Western Europe. How do you really focus on China, which is a problem?
Well, there's a supposition, I think, when he said that U.S. companies have to win China. To me, it's not some Nixonian who lost China. Actually, the Chinese are going to develop the next great media companies for China. And to me, it's more an issue of how do you engage with them and let them lead you through as opposed to superimposing that on top. Sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah, I was going to just say reflect the business. What's happening in those markets is, I think it's very much the innovation. I see that we talk about localization and what's the product, but I think also the business model is really, really important, because you in some ways those countries are coming from the angle that they contradict your conventional wisdom that what's happening in the marketplace. Like, let's take China, of course. Can you make money in the content in China when everything is more or less free? And we believe that one can make money, and there are some Chinese companies that have actually made money. Let's take an example of games. I think we saw that if you try to go with download this game and pay for it, good luck in China. But what they did was actually a lot of Chinese companies focus on the subscription model. So they actually made it run in a way that you are running like multiplayer games, for example, where you need to actually, it's part of the bigger game. It's a server based. You actually need to subscribe, and they are making money out of that. So it's focused. What's the right business model to approach those markets? And very often, if you think about if the starting point is like content, that everything is free, so how do you actually start to innovate there? Unlike the Western market, where we are kind of saying that the starting point is that everything is paid, and now we are fighting the free model.
Well, yeah, just for what it's worth, I think it's lazy for people to say content should be paid for. Individuals pay for service, and we're all people. We pay for services. We pay for something that provides us value. I don't know anyone who wakes up in the morning and says, I want to pay for content.
Yeah.
I want to pay for a service that does something.
Yeah, exactly. You need to provide some value add. It's something goes beyond. So you are saying that we have been too lazy?
No, I'm not blaming them. I'm saying us, the media business.
I was referring that us here.
Stirring it up. All right, we've got just a couple minutes left, so why don't we take a couple questions from the audience? Anyone? I can't see too well out there. Okay, we've got one right here.
I'm interested in your perspective on the origin of the relationship with the consumers in emerging markets when they have the mobile internet at their fingertips, but often have access to the internet at cafes. So the question I've got is whether or not the relationship with the content that they're interacting with is a hub and spoke system from the web to the mobile device, or whether it's directly into the mobile device and the web is just parallel to that world that they're in on a mobile device. Any thoughts?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I mean, I'll be honest and say that, from at the beginning, as we developed what we would do in WAP and then in mobile web and now with native apps, a lot of it was take the words, images, and video that was already being produced on the web and find a place for it within mobile. And I think you should do that, right? Because the opportunities to repurpose are there. But it is a different platform. It is a different sized screen, right? And there are different expectations. It's much, I think you, Chris, said snacking, which is it's a high volume usage but quick usage, even more so than what you might get out of, someone on a website. So we begin the process of, from a content point of view, but also from a functionality, tool, product point of view, what does this need to do mobile? How do you take advantage of location? How do you take advantage of other things that you can do now that you really can't even, you may not be able to do on the web? So now that, and we're doing this more because apps, frankly, are an order of magnitude different than what WAP experiences. WAP experiences weren't great consumer experiences, aren't great consumer experiences, not great advertising experiences either, by the way. And so now I think as we've seen development of what you can do, what's the art of the possible, it gets a lot more interesting. But you start, I think, with what you have, and then you pivot from there.
Yeah, I think one reflection on that's internet cafes. So we have actually seen that there is this. People have been exposed to somewhat the web through the internet cafes, but in a bigger opportunity, we really see that what's happening is that the content consumption is moving to mobile, and that's where the traction is. That just an example from the music, Indian market, we just launched a music service there, and basically people were asking, can you make money in music in India? And we see that is one of our better markets, and we needed to actually change in the Western market. We expect that people would sideload the music, so we needed to look at that, how to deliver the content over sort of the networks that are not always so good, but it's happening, and people are really using mobile as their primary device to really download the music and actually pay for it.
I guess two really quick thoughts on that. One, I'd love to see some research in the rapidly developing economies in terms of which direction, because I'm not sure. At least I've never seen it. The other thing is, I think you're pointing out something that again, there's a fundamental problem in the way that we think about our products and services, which is there should be that persistence. If I want to have a personal relationship with my readers and my viewers, when you're mobile versus you're on a PC. I shouldn't be serving you up content you've already seen. I should be pivoting and be creating a more personal and richer environment. We're not there yet, but that's, if we don't evolve to that, we'll be dead.
So we are getting the hook, so we're going to have to wrap it up now. But big thanks to the panelists, a really great discussion. And special thanks to Imran Khan for providing some great data that we kicked off with. From JP Morgan Chase's great global landscape report they put out every year. So thanks, guys, and turn it over to Drew.
And thank you to Jonathan for moderating a great panel. So again, to the conference sessions, you're going to go out to the right and wind around. The exhibit hall's to the left, and we're back here at 5:10. People who spend the money. So we've got Unilever, Pulte Homes, Hilton, and the president of activation at Starcom at 5:10 back here. Enjoy the rest of the day.